It's time to set the record queer. You don't have to be manipulative to be a teacher, but it helps.
Welcome to Setting the Record Queer, a podcast where queer people talk about the pursuits and communities they love. This is episode 34, and it's about education and school programming. My name is Alexis, my pronouns are it, its, and she, her, and I'm one of your hosts.
My name's Kaylee, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm your other host. Hey, Alexis.
Happy New Year, Kaylee!
Happy New Year!
It's December 20th!
No, it's not. Look at your calendar, listener of day one. It's December 31st. It's New Year's Eve.
Actually, it's January 1st. Is it?
No, it's 31st. This episode airs on the last day of the year. This is our final episode of 2019.
Yeah, it's December 31st. Happy New Year!
Pause the episode until 10 seconds before midnight, and then at 10 seconds before midnight, hit play, and I'll count you down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay,
Happy
it's 2020!
New Queer!
Whoa, it's 2020!
Congratulations, you, listener, have survived 2019. We're still stuck here. Pray for us.
Throw a rope into the past, please. Anyway, what have we been up to?
We'll get there. Slowly but surely, at a rate of 1 second per second, we will get there.
It's weird that one episode that took us 300 years to record, it's still 2019.
Oh yeah, that did happen, didn't it?
Anyway,
Podcasts exist in a non-linear time space. That is what we have established so far this episode.
So, what did we do this week? I think we've had like a bunch of boring real life stuff just take up a lot of time. So we haven't done a ton. We've both been playing Ring Fit Adventure a lot, but we will talk about that more later. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hint at what the next Taking the Minutes is going to be about. Wink, wink.
Yeah, and if you didn't catch that hint, next Taking the Minutes, Kaylee and I are going to talk about Ring Fit together.
Thanks for clarifying that one.
No problem, because we feel we have more to say about it than we can fit into this segment. I'm excited for that. Ring Fit, very good, very fun. Stay tuned for more.
Anyway, it's been pretty uneventful. We finished Three Below, which is the sequel series to Troll Hunters. It's very good. Still go watch it.
Yeah, like we said that Troll Hunters was good. Three Below is really good. Like, it makes Troll Hunters look real mediocre by comparison. Watch Three Below. And also watch Troll Hunters, because you have to watch Troll Hunters first, or Three Below will make no sense.
You know, I think I learned something today, but I'm not sure. Do we perhaps have someone who teaches to tell me, wow, this didn't work? Anyway, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure.
That's like our fourth failed transition in a row. We're on a bad streak with these.
It's all good. Hi, I'm Donnie. I use he, him pronouns. My official title right now is Director of After School Programming. However, I also have 4 years of experience as a social studies teacher.
It's quite the qualification you've got there.
Thank you.
It sounds good to me anyways. I mean, I was about to say I'm not in education, but I'm a college student, so I guess I technically am. But
you're in education in the other direction.
Yeah, I'm on the other side of that. I'm so close to being out of that side of that. Oh my god!
Congratulations for getting close, though.
It's time for senioritis for you, but
Man, I'm sitting
I've
pretty.
been senioritis since junior year of high school. Nice try.
Oof.
Senioritis is just a fancy word for burnout.
Yeah.
But this episode isn't about my learning experiences. I mean, I did just do a Taking the Minutes about music theory shenanigans, so I guess this podcast is occasionally about that, but not today. Today we're not talking about learning, but teaching, and we have someone who is far more interesting, I feel like, in all academic regards than I am. So yeah, let's get into that.
Which was really nice. And I also developed, he was such a hard ass with essays and stuff. And I ended up getting really into research and really into research papers. So it just kind of continued from there. But once I went to college, I wanted to keep studying history and being a social studies teacher. But especially as I came more into my identity as a queer person and as a trans person, it morphed more into I want to use social studies and use working with kids as a way to provide them support and provide them mentorship and also teach them how to use history and use precedents and learn how to bring justice for themselves as well as their community.
So following up on that, with providing that support for kids, do you find that you get support from the school or pushback or anything?
It's a very complicated answer. I think, so for context, I was a social studies teacher. Now I run after school programming, meaning that basically I work in New York City and I provide free programming for 6th graders through 8th graders. So we offer a wide range of programming, which is kind of fun because it's like running sports and also running clubs and stuff. And because of this and my teaching experience, I've worked in a lot of different schools and a lot of different school districts. And the answer is it really depends on where you end up. There are fabulous school districts and there are fabulous high schools and middle schools, at least in my experience, because I'm secondary. But you can go down the road and end up somewhere that is very conservative. And for context, I'm in New Jersey. So there's like over 200 school districts. So you could literally you could get hired in one school district. It can be super open-minded. You can be out there. You can teach radical education. You can be, you don't have to mince words when it comes to talking about content. And then there's another one. Then you could go to down the road and it can be an entirely different experience. And honestly, I have experienced great school districts and I've experienced horrendous school districts. And the good school districts are amazing and I love working with them. And honestly, I had a horrible experience with a particularly conservative school district and I actually quit the position after a couple months. It was that much like something I could not handle doing, not just on a moral level, but also on a mental health level. So it really does depend. And that also makes it all the more difficult for new hires because it's if you don't know the area, it becomes really hard to gauge if you're going to end up in a good school or not.
That really does sound kind of luck of the draw. I'm glad it's good in some places, at least. But let's take a step back here. We know kind of where you wanting to get into it started, but how did you get from there to doing it?
A lot of work. For me, as a social studies teacher, I had to make myself stand out, for lack of better terms, because there is a very, very high application. Just the amount of applications is just very, very, very high. From my understanding, a social studies position in New Jersey can get easily hundreds of applications. So if you want to actually have a shot at it outside of knowing somebody who works for the district or you're related to somebody who conveniently has pull in the district, you really have to make sure everything is what it needs to be. And in my case, I went to Rutgers. I got an undergraduate degree, and I actually did an accelerated master's program to get a master's in education. So I ended up at 23 having 2 degrees, which is interesting in hindsight because that made me incredibly educated, but not the best in terms of experience. And that's something that I've really tried to work around because I am such an academic, obnoxiously so sometimes. And because of that, because so many teachers are going through all these education programs, and a lot of them are, because there's such high education expectations, they come from incredibly privileged backgrounds, you end up in this situation where you just have these people who come out of education programs and are out of touch. They don't quite know how to connect to kids who are failing a couple classes. They don't quite know how to connect to kids who don't necessarily come from like a white middle class background. It's like, on one hand, I don't regret doing the education route that I did because it's what I needed to do. On the other hand, I hate that the system requires it. Care about tends to be something that I have been able to at least like get a little bit of attention and make myself stand out. I think that passion is really important, and I think that that passion should come in the subject that you're teaching, but it should also come in like what you like to do with youth, what you enjoy connecting with them with. As a teacher, you don't get to do nearly as much of that fun, just, you know, picking kids' brains and talking about the fun stuff. Usually you do have to focus on your academics, but I think showing that you have a grasp of what the youth care about is usually going to get you a little farther than most candidates. And I hate saying this because I feel like I don't like that this is a reality, but I think it is a reality. Is I went to Rutgers, which is a huge state school in New Jersey. Because of that, a lot of people know of the school, or like they follow the football team or the basketball team. And in my case, I did marching band. And I found that that was also a really nice connection. Being like, yeah, I was in the marching band. I performed at like a bowl game. I did this. And they're like, oh, okay, like that's really cool. Like that's something that once again makes you stand out, but also is a bit of a connection you can have with youth, because especially if you're applying to a bigger school, very possible that they have a pep band, they have a marching band. So they tend to appreciate that. So I guess what I'm getting at is you want to show that you understand the experience of your students. And I should be clear that, once again, I come from like a middle school, high school background. I don't necessarily know if this is going to help elementary school, because elementary education is taught to future teachers entirely differently. And the approaches of how to run things from an elementary level is drastically different because of developmental factors and a lot of other things.
So what specific jobs have you taken throughout your path in education, and kind of what responsibilities have you had for them?
Oh man. So I'm one of those people who, as soon as I was able to work, I was working with youth. So I have done nearly everything. I have tutored. I've been a camp counselor. I have done like first year interest groups. So like as a senior, I taught women's and gender studies concepts to freshmen. I was a tour guide for Rutgers, which made me interact constantly with potential students. I also was a camp director of a Girl Scout camp, which I absolutely love doing. I also was a social studies teacher. I've taught middle school and high school. And I then jumped into youth development as kind of like a general thing. And you're like, pardon? Hello? Okay. And then you have to like troubleshoot that. Like, never have been prepared for that.
Have you tried turning off the 5-year-old and turning them back on again?
Right.
That is my troubleshooting suggestion.
I was just like, the first time, and I say the first time because by the end of the camp experience, this happened to me at least like 6, 7 times. Like the first time I like looked at the other director and I was like, what are we supposed to do? And it was just like, she just autopiloted. She just like put on gloves, put the kid in the bathroom, like, you know, like to ask some questions, exchange clean clothes, like from underneath the door. I was like, what? Like, and then I realized that 5-year-olds don't usually spend time far away from home. They get stressed out and they do that. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, you're tiny.
So having done like literally everything at this point, do you have a preference? Is there like an end goal for all of this, or do you just enjoy going wherever the academic job opportunity winds carry you?
I have my favorites. I think, well, my end goal in life, which hopefully I can achieve, is I would love to become a director of a LGBTQ center. I would love to be able to provide programming and mental health resources and all of that type of stuff with a specific focus on youth. But I would also like to provide those spaces for adults. So far, my favorite experience, honestly, I really love my job now because, and I tell people, like, basically, in spite of all the stressful stuff that I have to deal with, ultimately, at the end of the day, my job is making sure kids have fun and that they're safe. And that today meant I run the anime club, because of course I do. And it was just like me and a bunch of kids watching Cheese Sweet Home and like talking about like the art of telling a story in like a minute and a half and like just watching this cat get into shenanigans. And it was just, it's a really fun experience because I get to see the kids outside of the classroom and I get to teach them a little bit about storytelling and animation and, you know, themes and stuff like that. But it's with something they really care about, which is really fun. Well, here's the thing. I can do sentimental or I can just do ridiculous. And it's kind of up to you what you want. The sentimental is very LGBTQ. So
let's do the ridiculous followed by the sentimental.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Ridiculous story. Probably the most ridiculous experience for me was I was teaching with a co-teacher, right? So I had my co-teacher in the room and I was like grabbing some stuff and coming into the room and I was like, whatever, okay. And I enter the room and I look at the boy whose desk is approximately right in front of the door. And I watch him unzip his bag. And I'm like, okay. Opens up his bag and he has a full shrimp cocktail. Shrimp around the ring, cocktail sauce in the center. And one, you're not supposed to have food. Two, why, sir, do you have a shrimp cocktail? And I just looked at him and I was just like, why? And he's just like, I don't know, I was hungry. And I was like, okay. And then I was just like, well, there's no food allowed in the rooms, so can you please put that away?
How old was this person?
Oh, he was 16.
Huh.
Yeah, and I was just like, it's just no ice pack, no nothing. And in my head, I was like, this is going bad. I'm wasting this shrimp cocktail. But like, I couldn't imagine doing any sort of teaching looking at that all, like the whole period. Like, I just couldn't. I was just like, I need you to put this away. This cannot happen.
Okay. That is not the type of food that one typically puts in their bag, but...
I couldn't even figure out how he got it. Because, like, I thought about it. I still think about this happened probably about 2 years ago at this point, and I'm still haunted by it.
Did he...
Haunted by the shrimp.
He probably stole it from a school like board event or something that he snuck into.
I mean, maybe my only other theory was he took his lunch period and scurried off to like the Stop and Shop that's like several blocks away. But even that sounds ridiculous to me as I say it out loud.
He went to the Stop and Shop, bought a shrimp cocktail, put it in his warm backpack, brought it back, waited till class started, and then ate the shrimp cocktail because he really wanted a shrimp cocktail during class.
It's just like, I truly love working with high schoolers. Like, they bring me so much joy, but honestly, it's because they do weird stuff like this. It's just like, middle schoolers are just like, they're a very specific type of unhinged that like you don't get to really like, I don't want to say you don't get to build a bond with them. That's not necessarily true. But with high schoolers, they have enough like cognitive function that you can kind of look at the kid and just go, what are you doing? And then they look at it. They're like, oh, that is kind of weird, isn't it? And it's like, yeah, it is. Please stop. I swear to God, half of my classroom management is me looking at a kid and going, you good? And then them going, and then like fixing whatever they're doing.
I mean, if it works, honestly, that seems like a very respectable teaching strategy.
You have to make it work for yourself. I mean, with me, it's like, kids are like, oh, you're so nice. And I'm like, it's because I don't know how to yell. That is why you think I'm nice. Because when I raise my voice, I have like the emotional presence of like a Shih Tzu. So like, I'm just gonna tell you in a calm manner, hi, please put your phone away, because I can't do much else. So luckily you listen to me.
Well, see, they don't know that you can't do much.
Don't make me raise my voice. No, seriously, don't. It will ruin everything.
I mean,
please don't.
I remember being a grade schooler. The teacher seems like they could just do anything.
Yeah, sometimes it is just the Wild West. And like, the thing is also, is like, it depends on your teaching style. Like, there are some, like, and that's the thing that I think a lot of young teachers really struggle with, because it's like they try to imitate other people. But like, there are some teachers who can get away with anything. And it's just purely because of their personality, because of their ego or whatever. And then there's other teachers that just like, if they tried any of those things, it just would never work. And it does cause bias in terms of like how administration works with certain teachers, which sucks. But also it's like, you go to you go through like a department and you can kind of pick out who is the one who is like, you go into their room and you have no idea what the heck is going to happen, because they're just going to just throw anything at the wall and see what sticks. I'm not that teacher.
All right, let's hear that inspiring, or that the sentimental story now.
Sure. So for me, I get very emotional when I think about this thing. So for me, I tend to attract a lot of LGBTQ students, which on one hand, I'm out. So like, that's not terribly shocking, but a lot of the time you end up kind of being like, interesting how I am surrounded by all of these kids who are, experimenting with presentation, who are just very curious and just want to try and find a community. And for me, I ended up getting very close with a student when I was teaching high school, mostly just because it was like, they would come into my room, they would draw like a meme of the day on my whiteboard, and it was like, okay, ha ha ha, okay, cool. But like, as they were doing it, we were chatting and things like that. And I will probably never forget, one day they came into my room and they were just like, all my friends want me to come out and I don't really know, like, I don't really want to. So we had like this long heart to heart about it, mostly because they came from a more conservative family. They really didn't feel comfortable coming out, but like, they were surrounded by LGBTQ people who were already out, and they were just feeling all of this pressure. And I try to not do too much of personal information, and it's not even necessarily because of like students shouldn't know anything about you, but like, I unfortunately have a pretty tragic backstory because I was disowned after coming out. So for me, I am very cagey about familial details, but with this kid, I kind of just was like, okay, like, and I just said like, look, like, you don't have to come out, like, nobody's like, you shouldn't feel like you have to come out when you feel comfortable. And I was just like really honest. I was like, I understand why you're worried, because I have been on certain ends of it that have not always been favorable. So we kind of talked about that and commiserated about that. And we had a bit of a cultural connection. So we talked a little bit about just like, dealing with some of the stresses and the familial expectations of coming from, in our case, like a Mediterranean background. And I was running late for a meeting, like a faculty meeting. And I was just like, screw it, I'm going to stay here. This is where I need to be. And basically just had this really just like touching conversation and just talked about and kind of vented about the stress of coming out. And at the end of it, and the thing about this kid is like, this kid does not really touch people, very just kind of like very to themselves. And then they were just like, oh, hey, like, can I have a hug? And I was just like trying not to cry. I'm like, okay. And then like, we hugged, and then they went off, and it was just like this moment where I was like, oh, this is actually why I like working with youth, and this is why I'm so passionate about it. I think that what I've learned, because I've done everything, is like, I like history, I like social studies, I like that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, I like working with youth. And that's it. That is why I am here. And I think that's a really important distinction for people to make, because if you want to work with youth, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to teach, and it doesn't mean you always have to teach. And I think that that's a soul-searching question that I think a lot of people have to make sense of. But once you figure it out, at least for me, like once I figured it out, and it was moments like that that helped me get there, it really made everything fall into place for me and what my purpose is in terms of being an adult, basically.
Once again, this is the classic setting the record queer moment of, how do I just start another point of conversation after something like that?
See, I was looking at our notes, and what made me happy was that I knew that Alexis had to speak after that and not me.
Thanks, Kaylee. I'm glad you are so supportive of me and see our relationship as an equal trade of difficulty. I love you, wife.
I love you too.
Anyways, so... Well, I think it's clear at this point that you've got your head around this whole teaching and youth coordination and outreach sort of stuff. You've been in this for a while. You've done everything there is to have done in it, and you really know your place in it. And I feel like this is maybe one of the harder topics to sort of breach as far as, you know, topics we've covered on this podcast of like, you know, how do you do this thing? And I don't feel like you could really easily say, like, how do you teach? And I know that's as well something that's very personal to everyone, but do you have any, like, specific tips that you've picked up that are things that sort of majorly informed your teaching style? Or any, you know, things that happened that informed that style that are worth mentioning? Or anything else like that about how you teach?
I got a lot. I think
Go. Good.
I got so many.
Go.
So I think the biggest thing that I have learned working with youth, and they're kind of interconnected. One, kids are the best BS detectors you will ever meet. Meaning that if you tell a lie, if you exaggerate things, if you say, no, you can't do it because I said so, or anything like that, they're going to sniff that something is up, and they're going to be immediately turned off. So I think a big thing that I have found is being honest is the best thing you can do with them. Relating to that, I think the best thing that someone can do is be yourself. And I know that probably is really hard for some people to make sense of. And I think it's also really hard to negotiate if you're marginalized, right? If you're in a certain working condition that you're not the most comfortable with being in a school district, whether it's being out or whether it's you're a person of color in a staff full of white people, or et cetera, et cetera. I think that it's sometimes it feels like very stressful, but ultimately you want to try and find a way to be as authentic of yourself as you can be, because I think that a lot of the time young teachers just try really hard to imitate, whether it's a mentor, whether it's just a past teacher that they had, whether it's just what they think, or like what they were taught they should do. And I think that it just ends up falling apart, because the second you are not acting like yourself, one, it's entirely unnatural. You feel really weird doing it. Two, the kids are going to pick up on it, and they're just going to be like, okay, like, I don't understand. I think another thing is also, and this is kind of a more difficult question, is understanding when you, as a teacher, are not really doing what you need to do. I think that a lot of the problem with teaching, and as much as I love working with youth, it's a high burnout rate. And I think that a lot of people end up staying in it because of tenure or because it's all they know or whatever. And I feel like it's such a detriment to the kids. And I think that if you know that teaching, if you do teaching, and I understand it sucks when you go through it and you think it's what you want to do, but sometimes it's just not the right fit, or it's not the right time, or you are just burnt out and tired. Sometimes you have to step away from it, and knowing when to step away from it, I think, is almost as important as knowing why you want to be in it. And I know that's like really kind of a sour piece of advice, but I know a lot of folks who, really thought that this was what they wanted to do and actually experienced it and went, you know what, this isn't it. And I think that there's a lot to be said about understanding when your presence is going to be a detriment to the kids. And I think another thing is understanding your boundaries, especially if you're a marginalized teacher. An experience that I've had a lot of is I have ended up being roped into a lot of LGBTQ support. I have written policies. I have given input on certain events and things like that. And while I don't mind doing it for the sake of the kids, I think that it's something that is really important to be like, no, this is not my job. My job is being a classroom teacher, or my job is being a director, or my job is whatever that job is. And either demanding compensation or encouraging some form of outside professional development, because I think a lot of marginalized teachers end up being like in-house professional development. And I think it puts way too much pressure on them, ostracizes them, makes them a target. And the second that teacher needs any type of support, they're not going to be able to find it. So I think it's really important for teachers to keep themselves like in check and keep themselves safe. To be like, you know what? No, I'm not going to tell you if this is transphobic or not. You should be able to like either pay me more, one, or two, take the time to actually try and figure this out and don't just depend on me, because I'm also not a monolith. So I think that advocating for that type of stuff is really important. What else? If you are a classroom teacher, if you have the time to, definitely run a club. Do something like that. Have fun. Because I think that as a classroom teacher, you're just not going to be able to bond with the kids at the level that you may want. And I think that, honestly, some of my best memories have been running clubs, or like, just having lunch and, just having some kids come in and we just chat about like Pokemon or something like that. Like, try to make as much time as you can to know these kids outside of the classroom. Because not only does it make your life more like worthwhile, but also you gain so much respect with the students. And sometimes that might mean you have to go to a basketball game and you don't know how the heck that works. Or sometimes you end up going to like, I don't even know, you go to a theater performance for a musical you didn't really want to see, but it really makes those kids so happy, and it can really make or break a C or B student. Like, if they know that you care about them, you're going to see such an improvement in their performance. And I think that that's just something sometimes you just got to do it. And you know what? It's not the end of the world. It's only a basketball game. It's only a musical. You will end up having a lot of benefits from it.
I'm sure those are great tips. I have no idea. I suppose that is another thing that is just inherent to this podcast of like, yeah, I'll bet that's probably good advice. I don't know. That's why I'm not the guest. With all of that in mind, I guess let's move on to talking about community. Are there any like teaching communities that you participate in? Is there, maybe a community or organization of like the teachers that you actually work with, or anything on a larger scale across social media or whatever? But what kind of spaces do you participate in as a, educator and program coordinator and all that?
This is actually something I've struggled with. And this is a Donny problem, which is that I like to think of myself as a fairly affable person. But when it comes to professional stuff, I do I say this without sounding like I'm mean? I'm somebody who tends to keep to myself unless the person has basically earned, like, they have earned my respect. In that case, I love collaborating with people, but I'm very cagey until I know that I can trust that person. And some of it is also because of the way, like, social studies is, right? Because it's such a, especially as a teacher, social studies is such like a highly political subject. And anyone that tells you otherwise is lying. And sometimes you end up in a situation where you're like, oh, hey, like, for example, it's like, we're teaching the 80s. Like, how are you teaching it? And someone just goes, oh, I'm only talking about, like, Reagan. And you're like, and anything, like anything of import relating to that? And they're just like, oh, yeah, I'm not going to talk about, like, AIDS. That's too controversial. And you're like, got it. I'm out. Bye. Bye. So I tend to be very to myself unless a person shows that they care about what I find to be very important pieces of history relating to marginalized people. So in my experience, the best type of community I've been able to make is forming those types of alliances within the classroom itself, within the classes themselves, trying to find at least one person to collaborate with. Because I think what is really beautiful about education and youth development is where so many fields you can't share information unless, like, you have explicit permission or money or whatever. Education is such a collaborative field that you can, if you have somebody that you trust, you can go into their room and be like, hey, like, I'm stuck on teaching a lesson about this. Like, what have you done in the past that's worked? And it's very commonplace to be like, oh, this is what I did. This is some of my materials that I used. Like, here, like, you know, make it what you need. If you need me to make any copies, let me know. And I feel like there's not many fields that are like that. But if you have somebody that you trust, it can end up forming a really important bond. That said, honestly, the best group of people that I've ever had in my corner with youth development is my cohort from grad school. Not everyone teaches anymore. Some people do. Some people are still in youth development like myself. But I found that they were people that I went through the experience of grad school together, and that was a really easy way to bond with them. So they were people that, like, we just have, like, a Facebook chat, and sometimes you jump in and are like, hey, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this, or I'm working with a kid and I'm really struggling connecting with them. And that tends to be really successful. There are statewide, national organizations that you as a teacher can get involved in. If you do camps, there are national level camp conferences you can do and stuff like that. I've never really done them myself, but I do know that those options are out there. And for the people who like doing them, they end up being very beneficial. So I think you just kind of got to do what you need to do. For me personally, I tend to be more isolated, but I also know that's usually what I need to do to be able to get the job done. But I definitely encourage people to try some national level organizations and getting involved in that way too.
So we touched on this earlier, but I kind of want to go a little more into detail. What resources are out there, and what kind of, like, actions can you take as a queer educator?
It's tricky. I think a lot of this hinges on what your school district is like. I think that, unfortunately, there aren't many community. It's really hard because finding a community as a queer teacher is something that I really struggled with. Because a lot of the time, for the fact of the matter is like the average demographic for a teacher in the United States is a middle-aged white woman. So, a heterosexual white woman. And it's very, very hard for teachers in certain districts to be able to have any sense of community because it's very possible that they are the only marginalized person in their department. And I think ultimately what this comes down to, and why I really like my current position, is because I'm in administration, I am making the hiring decisions now. So I can actively be like, oh, I'm going to go with this candidate because this candidate is a better fit for my community and better represents the demographics of the school. Or you can go to, you know what, like we need to, like basically you're actively creating the diversity that needs to happen. And I think ultimately what I'm getting at here is if you are a queer teacher, I hate saying this because it might require more work, but I think the best thing that you can do to form a community is to really find a way to get in on the administrative level or get in on the hiring process. Good schools will interview by committee, meaning that some of the best school districts that I have worked for have done humongous interviews where you are interviewing with current teachers, current students, principal, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that trying to find a way to get into that hiring room and giving feedback is the best thing that you can do because you can have a say in what you see. And eventually, if you are interested, actually becoming an administrator, whether it's a director like what I'm doing right now, whether it's a camp director, whether it's a principal, I think that's the only way we can actually form a community. Because unfortunately, right now, at least in my experience, thinking about my schools, I maybe have had about 2 women who are principals, and of the social studies department heads, every single one was a white man. So we have to find a way to get into that sphere. And once we get into that sphere, we'll actually start seeing a community of queer teachers. That's the only way.
Are there events that happen in teaching circles, whether on a like small or large scale? I mean, I suppose stuff like conferences and things like that. I mean, what do you do in the larger sphere of educators and school, officials and administrators, outside of just directly interfacing with students?
Like in terms of meetings and stuff like that?
I mean, more in terms of what happens like externally rather than, just behind closed doors business stuff, but really anything, I guess.
I mean,
if there's nothing, that's okay. This is kind of one of our every episode sort of questions. And usually when it's like we get an artist, they'll be like, yeah, I'm going to be at this convention. And it's like, okay, great. That's a good answer. It's not always super applicable, but if there's anything, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, some teachers do like presentations at conferences and stuff like that. I do know some people who have done things like that. Ultimately, I don't know. There isn't that much. I mean, sometimes you are in a school district with really spicy Board of Ed meetings, which I do encourage people to attend because if you want any say in how like the public education in your area runs, one of the best ways to do that is to appear at those. So sometimes like you get really scandalous ones, or like if a teacher was in the community's eyes unfairly let go or anything like that, you might see some shocking stuff there. It's weird because at least I've only worked in public schools, and public schools are one of those things where it's like they're very transparent but also simultaneously not. It's like, because you can read the minutes, you can sometimes watch a YouTube live stream of the meeting, you can go to the meeting itself, but you're not necessarily going to know everything. It's very intriguing. Like, if you want the full story, it's deceptively difficult to get to the bottom of it, even though everything is supposed to be like published and public record.
Play a detective game with every Board of Ed meeting is the impression I'm getting here. Or you just go and watch it all unfold.
Well, yeah, because like sometimes, because it's like if someone gets fired, it's gonna be under like their like employee number, so you have to be like, ooh, who is that? I don't know. Oh, what happened? And like you just kind of like start like asking around. You're like, why did this person get let go? And then like there's like, oh, like I heard this. There's like, teachers are the most gossipy people ever. And it's like, it's like you see like the teenagers and they are also very gossipy, but then you like go into the teacher's lounge, which by the way, another tip, don't get caught up in the politics of the teacher's lounge because it's really stressful. But like you go into there and everyone's like, oh my God, do you have this kid? Did you hear about this? Did you hear about this? Oh, did you see the video? It's like, stop.
Man, that makes like past me simultaneously like very curious about what they're talking about and anxious that I've done something to be the center of gossip.
Same.
Honestly,
Well, I mean, I was a teacher's pet all through high school, so like it was probably mostly good. I guess there was that time I was the first out transgender student at a Catholic high school, so like I'm sure they talked about that.
yeah, to be honest, teachers definitely talk about that type of stuff. They definitely like make conversation of that. They will make conversation of gossip. Another thing that they do, which is a little bit on the more helpful side, is like sometimes like you might zoom in and be like, hey, I got so-and-so. Does anyone else have so-and-so? Like, what have you found has worked with this student? And then it becomes a more productive conversation because then it becomes like, oh, like I've done this with this student. And like, I found like, you know, if I motivate them like this, like it really helps. Or like, if I just talk to them in this way, it works. So that's where the workshopping bit is a little bit more helpful. Sometimes, though, there are some kids that you just that I don't do this. I hate doing this because I honestly don't find it to be productive. But you'll see a teacher zoom in and be like, man, like I had so-and-so. They were like so ridiculous today. And it's just like, there's no need to put out this negativity. Like, why must we act like our students? Let's calm down. But yeah, if there's anything that is like, especially if there's anything incriminating going around, like teachers usually find out. Honestly, it's not because we personally do it, but because usually we have a student or two that's like, hey, did you hear about this? And it's like, well, now I know. Thank you. Which usually is how I find out anything. I tell kids, I'm like, I don't want to know who you're dating. I don't want to know anything like that. And then someone's like, oh, yeah, and so are dating. And I'm like, great, now I know. Now I'm not going to be able to stop thinking about this. Thank you.
Curious that you, with you mentioning, you know, sort of teachers working together to figure out how to handle certain students. At what point, you know, maybe if someone is particularly difficult to teach or particularly intent on just not caring at all whatsoever, I guess my question is, at what point do you have to give up, or like how many different things are on the table to try?
This is a tough one. This is a very tough question because I think that the threshold is different for everybody. I have a reputation as somebody who works with youth of being incredibly patient. My threshold is far. I can handle things many teachers would give up on. It's one of those things where I think, unfortunately, this is where the aspect of like kids need a community comes in, because ultimately you as the teacher saying, hey, I believe in you. Hey, I think you can do better. Hey, you need to do this, can only go so far. And I think that sometimes you do have to just be like, I'm going to be kind. I'm going to try my best with this kid, but I understand there's not much I can do because a big roadblock is parents. And this sometimes means the parents are not responsive. You call, they don't answer, you email them, you tell them that their kid is failing, you tell them that they need to help work on homework, and they just don't respond. And other times you end up in a situation where the parent willfully just entirely refuses to get the kid the support that they need. And I think a really tough thing that happens, especially if you're someone like me who has a fair share of mental illness related stuff and has a knack for kind of picking up on it. I have ended up with a couple students that I have just watched and just been like, no, like you need support, and you need support outside of the school. And you try bringing up to the parents as delicately as possible. Sometimes you even get like a school psychologist or a social worker in on it. But parents, if they, ableism, whatever, if they refuse to see that their kid needs support, sometimes that's just a dead end. And I've had students where I've been like, oh, this kid has a learning disability. This kid has difficulty reading. And then I've gone, because like usually you as the teacher have to be like, hey, like I think something is up, and you report it. And then they go through the whole entire diagnostic process. And there's been times where I've been like, oh, this kid's in high school and doesn't know how to read. What is going on here? And I went to make a report, and I found out that this kid has been reported 5 times before I had them. And each and every time the parents denied that anything was wrong, and the parents had the final say. And that's just where the conversation ended. I think that's just a big struggle with it in terms of like, when do you give up? And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of it is made or broken by the parents themselves. And it's a really tough thing to accept. But there comes a point where you just have to be kind and try your best to support the kid, but also maintain the boundaries that you need to get through the year.
I don't know how to go from that to this question, but I'm just going to bluntly do it because I don't have a better idea. How do you recommend someone get started in teaching?
I think you have to I think the first thing is really truly ask yourself, why do you want to teach? I think that if your answer is ultimately something about impacting youth in a positive way, or providing a possibility model for them, or teaching them, I don't know, like empowering them in some way. I think that's really what it comes down to. If you want to empower youth in some way, I say yes, cool, go for it. After that, I think you have to try and do a real deep dive on what subjects or age group you're interested in working with, and what you have to do to actually get the certification. The thing is that I can tell you as much as I want about New Jersey and how to become a teacher in New Jersey. I can even tell you about New York City because now I work in New York City, so I have approximate knowledge on that process. But the fact of the matter is that education is so uniquely tied to location. And if you are in the US, literally every single state has different standards, down to the tests that you have to take. Certain scores will be accepted in certain states, which is a whole entire discussion that we can have another time about state standards for each education program. But really looking at it, saying, okay, what do I have to do in this state or in another state if I want to work there? And really try and plan it out. Another thing to factor in is, how old are you? If you are a youth, if you are in high school or something, it will be, or even in college, it's a little easier to kind of go, okay, let's go a traditional route. Let's get this degree, this degree. Alternative route teaching is very conditional in terms of what subjects, in terms of what the standards are, in terms of if the school district is even going to potentially look at your resume. There is a lot of snobbery in certain schools, and there's a lot of privilege with some of these administrators who, especially in like, say, social studies, where they go, why am I going to go for this person who doesn't have a master's but has like worked with youth for a decade, when I can just pluck this kid right out of college with a master's and just put them into the position, and I don't have to pay them as much because they don't have the experience. So I think really looking in, talking to people in the field and trying to figure out, is it a realistic goal to be an alternative route teacher to being just a teacher right out of school? I think you really have to kind of plan ahead and really be realistic about it. And I think also, and going back to my own personal motivation, is really asking yourself, are you teaching because you want to share the subject and use it to empower students? Or are you someone who just wants to work with youth? I've learned, especially within the past few years, that I don't have to teach to work with youth. And there are times that I do miss a traditional classroom, but sometimes I really don't. I like just being able to have a looser structure, and I like being an administrator, and I like, as much as sometimes paperwork makes me pull my hair out, like I like detail work like that. And I like maintaining an order in that way. Sometimes I think that people think that they need to teach because it's the only way, myself included when I was a kid. But I think also determining how you want to work with youth is also a really important factor. And it may not always be in the classroom, or it may be a piece of what your experience is working.
All right. Well, with all of that in mind, It is time for us to move on to our performance showcase. The link is not in the show notes. Let me scroll up until I find it. I found
it. It to you. Okay, so real quick before we get started, I have read it. It is a little long to read the whole thing live. We'll, of course, link it in the show notes. And if there's a specific part either you want to read or you want Alexis to read, I guess I could do it too, but Alexis is the one who's good at reading stuff. So if there's a specific part and we can summarize the whole thing and leave it for people to read the whole thing themselves.
Up to y'all. I don't know if there's a specific part that stood out to you. I understood it was too long, so I'm not offended in the least.
I mean, it feels very personal, and I would feel weird picking a part for you.
Oh, no, you can. Don't worry.
I don't know what to pick.
I mean, we can always read, like, the first 2, or however many would be reasonable. Like, when in doubt, chronological order.
Sure. Let's do that.
Chronological order on a non-linear piece, yes.
Okay, so let's get back into the episode.
Chronological order, or I guess in this case, more accurately, given that there are literally year dates, and they are not in order. Order of words on page.
Yes.
So, why don't you tell us about what we're looking at here and what we're about to hear a segment of?
Sure. So it's called Working on Progress. It actually appeared this year in a zine called Now Zine, which is a reflective kind of like a what the world is and what are some of the voices of this era, for lack of better terms. So it was a collection of stories and comics and art from a whole bunch of different people. Working on Progress for me was kind of a reflection on my relationship with teaching, but as a queer person. So bouncing from my experience having a teacher that I knew was gay, but really didn't get the confirmation of until after I graduated high school and followed him on social media, to my own personal journey of being out. And especially in my case, I at one point lived in the town that I taught. So people would see me with my partner at the time. They would see me just kind of living my gay life and kind of making sense of some of those emotions. So it was a very personal piece, but it was kind of interesting reflecting on it and my relationship with how, like, for me, being queer and being a teacher are kind of, they are both huge identifiers for me.
All right, yeah. So this piece is a bit long. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read the first little bit of this, and a link to read the whole thing will be in the show notes. It's good. You should read the whole thing. Working on Progress. 2009. I'm officially graduated, which means it's fair game to finally send friend requests to all the teachers I've discovered on Facebook. In truth, I only really want to keep in touch with 1 or 2 of them, specifically my English teacher. He accepts my friend request quickly enough. During the myriad of graduation parties, I find downtime with the salutatorian, our friends on the other side of the patio, chatting loudly. We talk about social media, and she mentions that she's friends with our English teacher. He posts about his boyfriend a lot, she notes. I nod my head in between bites of potato salad. It's kind of nice that we can see that now, she adds. Like, it kind of sucks that he probably couldn't talk about him in school. I look up and try to cycle through conversations with my teachers from when I was a freshman, and he struck up conversation within the hall to the messages I already sent him on Facebook. He never said he was gay. Sure, he never said he was straight, but he certainly didn't say that he was gay. I hum to myself for a long moment before I continue eating my potato salad, unsure if that was my observation to share. 2004. I love your shirt, someone tells me. I look up and I see a man standing in front of me, hunched over slightly. I pull awkwardly at my shirt, trying to make sure my lower back is covered. It's a Labyrinth shirt I bought with spare money at Hot Topic a few weeks earlier. It features David Bowie as Jareth with a banner underneath that reads the iconic line of, "Fear me, love me, do as I say." I don't know how to react. I don't know who this adult is, but he has a lanyard, so he probably works for the school. He's entirely dressed in black with pale skin and dark hair. "Oh," he exclaims, as if he's aware of my apprehension. "I'm an English teacher here." He formally introduces himself, and I allow myself to smile. We chat a little bit about Labyrinth, and the entire time I'm shocked that a teacher actually knows about it. "Well, I'll see you around," he eventually says before he walks away. I rode the high of an adult validating my interests for the rest of the day. We want to do one
Boss quit today.
So yeah, that's a little teaser from this piece. Basically, it's quite a bit longer than that, just about 2,000 words or so. Go get the link in the show notes. Go read the whole thing. It's really good. I really enjoyed reading through it. So the first thing I want to talk about this is sort of what place these sorts of writings have in your life and what relationship they have with your teaching.
I feel like with this piece it's not really about teaching in the subject sense. Actually, the teacher that is featured in this one is not the teacher that made me want to teach. It's more about the visibility of queerness, and in my case, it's being the kid who found someone and wanting to connect with that person, to then becoming the adult who now is finding himself in a situation where kids are trying to connect, in that decision of, are you going to be out about it or are you going to be open about it? And mostly looking at how in the world, it's easy to get caught up on negative stuff, right? It's easy to get caught up on the fact that we, in terms of progress, are not where we need to be. But I think there's something to be said about what it was like when I was in high school versus what it's like now. And how, no, we don't have as many LGBTQ teachers as we should. But the fact that you can go to a school now and someone is out and they actually like, no, I don't have a boyfriend. Like, I have a girlfriend, or I'm seeing somebody that's like the same gender as me or whatever. It's just kind of reflecting on that change, but more importantly, being an active participant in that change.
So how do these writings come together? Is this something you do regularly for a specific event or purpose? I know you mentioned that this one was part of a zine. Is that a regular thing for you, or do you just sort of write when the inspiration strikes?
I actually write pretty frequently. So I do mostly personal essays and or reviews, but I do have a soft spot for long form fiction, and I also have done some short stories. It's something I've made a more conscious effort to participate in the past 2 years, mostly because it was kind of one of those, my perspective as a marginalized person is not always heard, so let me try and be an active participant in it. So a big place that I've done a lot of stuff for like Palm Mag and stuff like that, and it's been a lot of fun. It's not always easy to balance when you also have a full-time job, but it's something that I have I love writing so much, and it legitimately is, as much sometimes I'm like banging my head, it's a really fun process. And I should also admit that I just write a ton of fan fiction, and I've been doing that consistently since I was in high school. So like I'm writing all the time.
That's more than I was expecting, I guess. So how, if at all, does like doing all of this writing affect your teaching, or does doing all of this teaching affect your writing?
I think it's definitely teaching affects writing, because for me, I think that there's a couple thoughts I have connected to this. One, I think that it's really influenced my writing style. Something that I've been told consistently is the readability of my writing style, which I think is really interesting. Like a lot of people are like, oh, like it's very clear. On one hand, it means it's not the most, not the most purple of prose, but it also means that there is like a readability to it, which I really do appreciate being able to share my work. But I also think teaching also deeply influences just how I handle characterization, because something that I'm really appreciative of when it comes to teaching is I get to constantly work with youth. So I am relatively on the pulse because I listen to them, for better and for worse. And because of that, it honestly really helps with like writing dialogue or figuring out pitches or things like that, because it's like, well, what are people into right now? Let me look in my classroom. What are kids into right now? What are they following? Is there any media that they're really into? And a lot of the time that means, oh no, if I want to connect, I got to watch it. I got to check it out. And then it helps me stay on the pulse and be able to speak to it.
I think it's time to move on to our listener questions. Alexis, if people have questions for us or for our guests, where can they ask them?
If you have questions for us or for our guests, you can send them to us via our Twitter at STRQueercast, via email at settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, or from in our Setting the Record Queer community Discord at bit.ly/STRQcord. Back to you, Kate.
Thank you.
I just suddenly got into the like weather reporter voice there, and I just rolled with it.
We have one question this week from Steph via email. So, what is the most baffling question a kid has ever asked you?
Okay, let me think about that. Baffling question. Most baffling question. So, like, I talked about how I'm like a pretty level-headed person when it comes to teaching, but something that always will get under my skin is plagiarism, probably because I also write. And I had a senior in high school write an essay, and he just copied and pasted sentences, no citation, nothing, just like worked them into the body paragraph. So like when I put it in like a plagiarism checker, it just red flags everywhere. And I was just like, hey, like, this is plagiarism. And they just kind of looked at me. They're like, what do you mean it's plagiarism? And I was just like, hmm. And that usually is like, I know it's not the most funny, but it's kind of like me just kind of sitting there being like, at least own it at this point. Like, you knew I had the technology to figure this out. Like, don't look at me like copying and pasting text is not, is like, it is plagiarism. Like, don't tell me it's not. That's usually the one that I get the most confusion with. Sorry, I don't have a funny one for that one.
Oh, that's okay.
I mean, this is baffling. That's honestly surprising. I've admittedly always kind of felt like every class that involves writing ever, spending like a whole solid several minutes being like, don't plagiarize, it always felt unnecessary to me. I could never see anyone doing it, but I guess if it really happens, then...
I mean, I can see people doing it easily. I mean, I'm not a teacher, but I've TA'd classes before, and I have a story that I'll share, but I can't see anyone being told don't plagiarize and then going, oh, okay, I was going to. Now I won't. But gosh, I TA'd a class, and this one person cheated by taking photographs of other people's lab reports and then printing out the, like, okay, so he turned in his lab reports, like, he waited 3 weeks for, like, students to turn in their lab reports, them to get graded, and them to get them back. And the professor, despite the fact that he wasn't supposed to, would leave the graded lab reports in a cardboard box outside his door. So he would look through the bin, take the highest scoring one, take cell phone pictures of all of the pages, and then just like, he would retype all the text, but for the images, like the graphs and stuff, he would take like the images he had stolen, and put them in as if we wouldn't notice that he had taken a photograph of another student's lab report. The best point was when students started complaining that their lab reports were getting stolen. And we're like, yeah, we know who did it.
I will say, relating to that, that might actually, this is the most baffling question I've ever gotten relating to plagiarism. I was talking to a student. It was like, you know, during finals week. She just had the final, and she's talking to me, and we're just like shooting, you know, just having conversations, whatever. And then she just kind of goes, hypothetical question, what would you do if you knew someone cheated on a test? And I was like, how so? And she goes, oh, you know, like taking a picture of a final. I was like, oh, hypothetically. And I was like, well, you would probably get in trouble because you were complicit in letting that happen. And then 5 minutes later, she's like, oh yeah, so here's what happened and here's who did it. I was just like, thank you for this information. I'm now going to go with it. It was just like, she was just like, well, I don't know what happened. I don't know. Maybe it happened. I don't know. And then like 5 minutes later, she's like, oh yeah, this is exactly what happened. This is exactly which pages we're taking pictures of. And this is exactly who did it. Open shut case.
Huh.
You turned that kid into a snitch.
I'm quite, I think that's something that, it's good to kind of know. This is going to sound terrible. It's good to know your weak links because you just gotta know. Like, you gotta know who is going to give me the dirt that I need to know. Not who's dating who. No, who's going to tell me that they are being dishonest on an academic level. And you figure it out, and usually you can get to the bottom of it pretty quickly, especially with like Google Docs, because it's like there are ways to sneak around Google Docs, but there's also a lot of ways to figure out exactly what was going on. My favorite is when essay materializes over the course of like 1 minute in the editing history, and you're like, where'd that come from? And then you usually figure out exactly who was collaborating on a document together, and then like basically just like trying to circulate the same answer and stuff like that. Got to be tech savvy as a teacher, because they're going to try and outsmart you however they can.
In fairness, if I am ever given a text entry field where I know someone can watch me enter text live, I will write it somewhere else and then paste it in after, because I do not want people to watch me make mistakes and fix them, or mash the keyboard when I get bored.
Totally fair. It's just, it's more like when you're doing certain types of things on like Google Classroom, sometimes that indicates something a little odd is happening, particularly if you look at due dates and things like that. Like, it's not always going to be a tip off, but once in a while, you're, especially like editing essays and things, you're kind of like, what's going on, buddy? Everything okay? Try and get to the bottom of it.
Okay. See, relating to the weakest link, I feel like you would instantly know whenever it's the kid who says, teacher, you forgot to assign us homework.
Yeah, they're pretty good. They're pretty good at being your weak links. My favorite...
I guess no one would trust them, though.
Well, the really good ones are not the ones who say it, but the ones who, like, look it, if that makes sense. Like, they give you, like, a look of, like, hey, wait a second. And then you look at them and you go, oh, I forgot something. Thank you. Unfortunately, these are usually, like, incredibly anxious students, but sometimes kids are not going to tell you directly, and sometimes you got to figure out roundabout ways. And unfortunately, sometimes it's me talking to a kid after school to find out that they were taking pictures of a final. Okay. And that's just how it goes.
My high school advisor did this really mean thing that we had these group advisory sessions, and she was the vice principal of the school, and we knew she was doing this, but for some reason it never stopped working, where we'd all meet for our advisory meetings, and what she'd do is she would say, she would like give us the first sentence of a piece of gossip she wanted to know the rest of, and then lean back and watch us talk amongst ourselves as she got to learn all the details. And we all knew she was doing this, because after like 3 weeks of this, it's like, we just told her everything about what's happening in the school. And then we'd come in the next week and we'd do it again.
That is aspirational. That is absolutely aspirational.
She was a genius.
I by no means want to make it sound like you have to be manipulative to be a teacher, but I can't say that it hurts.
But
you don't have to be manipulative to be a teacher. You just have to be manipulative to be a good one, and there's the stinger.
Yeah. Yeah,
Any-
it is.
Anyway, let's move into our last segment, which is Kaylee's question of the week.
Oh boy.
For those who don't know, Kaylee's question of the week is your fairly typical question. It's the sort of thing that your favorite teacher in high school would like put as an extra credit question that had nothing to do with the subject, but maybe they just wanted you to have a little bit of fun. Shoutouts to my 9th grade physics teacher.
That was the most normal Kaylee's question of the week introduction I think you've ever done.
I was thinking
I was
about my 9th
totally
grade...
expecting that to take a turn for the Eldritch Horror, and it didn't.
I was thinking about my 9th grade physics teacher. I remember, because it's appropriate, around the holidays, she put a bunch of like questions on the final, on the midterm that was like, hey, here's a bunch of trivia questions about the movie Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And I turned it in and I didn't know any of them, and I was like, I'm Jewish and this isn't fair. And then she gave me full credit on the extra credit. So that worked. Anyway, if you could add any subject to the standard school curriculum, not because you think it would be a good idea for kids to learn, but because you want to see it, which subject would you add? And as always, Kaylee's question of the week is an all play.
Oh, I had a good answer like 5 minutes ago, and now it's gone.
I'll
Dang
go
it.
first. I want to teach. I want someone to teach the kids grifting. I want like a scam artistry class, and in order to get a good grade in the class, you have to trick the teacher into giving it to you. That's your final. Your final is to find a way into the grading books and get your grade up as high as you can.
That's so good. I don't know how to top that. Jeez.
See, I write the questions, so I get more time to think about them than everyone else.
You say this, but we came up with this question together, and I still don't have an answer. I swear I had one like 5 minutes ago, and it is gone. It's nowhere to be found.
Jeez. I worry I'm not funny enough.
You got this. It also doesn't have to be a funny answer. It can just be, I want to see the kids doing cool stunts. Although I have just taken I have just taken a second answer, which is movie stunts.
So this is a bit of a serious answer and a bit of a fun answer. There's a lot of contemporary educational theory about the benefits of integrating tabletop gaming concepts in the classroom. So you do get to see, if you go to certain classrooms, and I've seen some classrooms actually do this, where they basically like turn the whole entire class into basically like one big tabletop game, which is really fun. And I guess this is also just kind of like why I love youth so much. I would love to see some sort of, we'll say Dungeons and Dragons just as like an equalizer for this class, where teacher stuff, they have to learn teamwork and working together and all that type of good stuff. But also, I just want to see them come up with the weirdest characters, because I highly recommend doing any of these types of activities with kids, because they come up with bonkers stuff. I think that's what I would want to see.
You mentioning that just made me remember that we practically did that in my 9th grade history class. We did like basically a giant class-wide, like something along the lines of a like Risk sort of deal, like big war game sort of thing when we were covering like Greek history. Shoutouts to that teacher. He was a really good guy. He was also the like faculty contact for the cartooning club, which I was the president of. We had good times. Oh, I still don't have an answer. Heck.
Just, you got this.
I swear I had one. I swear.
Is coming...
And now it's just gone.
Is coming up with an answer to the question one. Do you want the children to not fall into your trap?
Surviving Kaylee's question of the week 101.
I've come up with 3 answers in the time it's taken you, just saying.
Yeah, I know. You're better at this than I am.
I have a class where they just learn how to do like weird chalk optical illusions. So they just like prank the whole entire school by making it look like there's like going to be a hole when they're walking down the hall.
That's good. Can you get the
You
like
two are just
inverse of that class where you learn to Wile E. Coyote or Roadrunner, and they and like the students actually walk into the class. You know, they draw like a chalk door near where the thing is normally, and then they walk in, and then their students are like, "Huh, I better come into the classroom," and then they bonk into the door.
Yes.
All right, I'm stealing that answer. That's mine now. Thanks for appreciating my answer.
So your answer, which wasn't mine, is real life Looney Tunesing.
Yes. The answer that I came up with.
The answer that
and presented as mine. That wasn't yours.
Didn't we tell you not to plagiarize like 2 minutes ago? Who's the weak link in this call? Who am I getting to snitch on you?
There's no one. There's no one.
Oh my gosh. All right, Alexa. Well, I think that does it for this week. Let's bring us home.
All right, well, before anyone can give any further consideration to what percentage of the work that I just did was original, that's an episode right there. If you have a good answer to this week's Kaylee's question of the week, please be sure to give it to us on Twitter at STRQueercast, via email settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, or in our Setting the Record Queer community Discord at bit.ly/STRQcord. And with that is an episode. Donnie, thank you so much for coming on. This was a great time. Kaylee and I are both exhausted right now, and Donnie has absolutely carried this episode, and we very much appreciate that.
It was my pleasure to be on.
So I'm glad you enjoyed. I also just want to give a shout out to former guest Jazz, who actually made the connection that made this episode happen. You should also go listen to their episode. It's the one about cosplay. I want to say it was episode 5.
They've also been here muted the entire time.
Yeah, they've been sitting in on this, as is their fair due for making this happen. We're getting yelled at in Discord chat right now, but they can't hear you. You have no power here. But yeah. Anyways, thank you so much. This was great. If our listeners want to keep up with you and your teaching exploits or your writing exploits or anything else that you do, are there places on or offline that people can come find you?
Sure. So there's a couple places you can find me. If you want to see my publication list as well, so just like basically anything that I have published, whether it's online or for purchase, you can check out my WordPress, which is called donniedon'tblog.wordpress.com. And there's a convenient little publication list. I also have a podcast. So if you have ever been interested in Degrassi, The Next Generation, I have been for the past year and change embarking on a journey with my friend Frank, who has never seen an episode on the whole entire series. We just finished up season 4. We're going to be starting season 5. Actually, our mutual friend of the show, Jazz, has also appeared on our show. And it's a pretty wild time to revisit because for me, it was like one of the most influential TV series for me. And now having to confront it again has been making me have to unpack some things. But it's been a lot of fun and it's always a blast chatting with my friend Frank. So if you want to check that out, it's called I Hope I Can Make It Through podcast. You can find it on Podbean. You can also find us on Twitter at IHopePod. So if you want to check that out, that's pretty cool. But if you want to see the most raw youth development related stuff, your best bet is probably following my Twitter, which is at DMIsUnbreakable. My latest tweet relating to it was a 12-year-old looking me dead in the eye and saying, yeah, you could probably pass for 16. And my reaction to that, which is terror. She's like, you could probably go as low as 13, really. And in my head, I'm like, no.
Attend your own classes.
No one will ever know.
I was just like, what? Oh, relating to that, there was a time once that I got thrown out of my own storage closet because a teacher thought I was a student sneaking in. So there's sometimes tweets like that. Unfortunately, my Twitter is also kind of a space of me unpacking Fire Emblem Three Houses. So a heads up, if you go onto it, it is just fan art and me headcanoning and all that type of stuff. So just be prepared. There will be some teaching content, but there will also be me screaming about Fire Emblem characters. But maybe you're interested in both, so feel free to follow me and continue a conversation with me in that way.
Yeah, definitely be sure to check out all of that stuff. Check out Donnie's podcast. And just like every other time that a guest brings up a podcast, it's never not awkward to be like, hey, also the podcast that you're listening to, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But hey, also the podcast that you're listening to, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. If you enjoyed this podcast that you're listening to, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/settingtherecordqueer. Our patrons can get early guest reveals, access to a special patrons exclusive Discord channel, high quality or early episode releases, and special thanks on the show. We'd like to offer a special thanks to our $25 patron, Jane, who you can find on Twitter as @CallMeCadejo. That's @CallMeCadejo. And just as a reminder, you too can have your name read out on the show. As a patron, you can get any of those benefits for supporting us, all while continuing to help this show grow and get into things like advertising and all of that. Otherwise, if you liked this show, be sure to subscribe or leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Tell a friend about us or recommend us on your social media. You can find us on Twitter at STRQueercast, via email at settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, or come join our Setting the Record Queer community Discord, where you can hang out with us hosts, other Setting the Record Queer listeners, and even some STRQ guests that have decided to grace us with their presence at bit.ly/STRQcord, all lowercase. While you're there, ask questions for us or for our guests, send feedback about the show. Maybe you have an idea for who or what could be on this podcast. Maybe you think you should be on this podcast. We would love to hear from you. The logo for this show was drawn by Cubotic. That's at QBTIC on Twitter, or Cobot, QOBOT.tumblr.com. The theme music and production for this show is done by Thrill Me Music, and you can find more information about her work at thrillmemusic.squarespace.com. Kaylee, where can our listeners find you?
People can find me on Twitter at WitchesHex. That's WITCHS Hex. Follow SoulSync's development at SoulSyncGame on Twitter. That's SOULSYNC Game. And there's actually a couple things on my itch these days. So if you want to play a game I made in 14 hours with Cube King, or read that light novel from like a million years ago, 6 months, you can go to witches_hex.itch.io.
And you can find me on Twitch and Twitter as @DoubleGearSYS, as in Double Gear System. And you can find my Final Fantasy XIV virtual photography shenanigans over at Instagram.com/echo_white. That's EKHO_white, as in the color. I haven't been as active there lately, but a couple days ago I did post some pictures of the night sky and Camp Tranquil, and they're pretty nice. They do live up to the name Camp Tranquil. Thank you so much for listening to this wonderful episode 34 of Setting the Record Queer. Be sure to listen to our Taking the Minutes about Ring Fit Adventure when that comes out. I'm sure it's gonna be great. We haven't recorded it yet, obviously, because it's, the next thing that's happening. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.